Working Cows Podcast, episode 353. This episode is brought to you by Ranch Right.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag Studios. And this episode is brought to you by Ranch Right. There are 3 guarantees in life: death, taxes, and paperwork. Ranch Right can help you avoid one of them. If you're a successful business, you are probably paying some taxes. But that doesn't mean you have to be stuck inside preparing your paperwork for the accountant. Enlist the team of financial experts at Ranch Right to get you back outside doing more of what you love. They're committed to providing you with actionable financials so that you can build profitable businesses and create generational wealth. While some things in life are inevitable, being mystified by your numbers doesn't have to be one of them. If you are ready to entrust the paperwork to a team of people that actually enjoys this type of stuff, then visit ranchrightllc.com and get back outside to more of what you enjoy. Very excited to be joined today by Clayton Marxer. Clayton is the host of the newly minted Living Western podcast, and we're going to talk to him about that today. Some of the motivations for starting the podcast, what is the target that the podcast is hoping to hit, why is he doing it, and some of the things that make him uniquely qualified for this adventure. And so really excited to discuss with him today the Living Western podcast. Clayton, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast. Clayton, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
First of all, appreciate you facilitating the connection that I've had with your dad over the last few months. It was really a privilege to get to sit down and talk to him after having consumed his book. Reading is not a fair term for it. I listened to it. I took a PDF of it and put it through a PDF reader app so I could listen to it. And it's just been real fun getting to know him over the last few months. So thank you for facilitating that connection.
Well, I have to thank you because that episode and my conversations with you have kind of inspired my own podcast.
Yeah, very good. That's what we're here to talk about today is the podcast. So what is the podcast? First of all, give me the elevator pitch.
All right. Well, my new podcast is called Living Western, and I started it because I have another social media presence, we'll call it, our brand. It's called The Adventure Cowboy, and that started from an inspiration from a hunting client who told me that I had a unique life and a unique outlook on life, and that I should be sharing it. And I didn't really know how to share it at the time. So I just got a video camera and started, taking along on my adventures, which at that time was a lot of hunting and shooting old cowboy guns. But there's a bigger story that I wanted to tell. And when you kind of put yourself in a niche of old school cowboy guns and hunting, the audience that shows up for that didn't necessarily show up for ranch stories and philosophical discussion. So fast forward years, and then Dad put out his book, started listening to a few podcasts like the one with you, and it really got me thinking, there's another way to tell a bigger story. And it's something all completely new to me, but I decided to step off into it. So the podcast is called Living Western, and it's dedicated to telling the real story of the rural American West through individual stories of the amazing people who call this part of the world home. And that was just something I came up with while I was recording that first episode, and I liked the sound of it, so I just kind of made it my tagline.
It is a great tagline, by the way, and the way it rolled off your tongue in the first episode, I wouldn't have guessed. that it was, but that it was spur of the moment like that, but it was really good, and I really do like it. It's a very punchy sentence that really kind of captures the idea of, I think, what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the gist of what I'm trying to do is help tell the story of the rural American West and agriculture, cowboy culture, Western culture, but tell it in a little bit different way than maybe some of the other folks that are out there doing it. Because I tell you where some of this idea came from was flying into SeaTac, Seattle Airport. I'm from a town of 700 people. There's not a single stoplight in our entire county. And then flying into SeaTac, there's just like a sea of homes and houses. And as we're flying in, I just started imagining like all of these houses have people that live in them. And how do I get a message about my culture to people like that? And the best way I can think of how to do it is through some sort of commonality. And it doesn't really matter what culture you're from. Everybody can appreciate the human existence. Everybody can appreciate human problems, joys, challenges, triumphs. And I just think that I'm in a position with the connections that I have and the background that I have to try to be able to be one of those storytellers, because there's a lot of people out there looking into Western culture, largely because of a TV show. Why not have more? I mean, there's other people out there sharing the story, but why not add another one to the mix that can give some realistic background?
So is your niche, your target audience, is the fan of the TV show, is the, maybe the suburban dweller or the urban dweller? You're trying to give them a place to go and learn about this culture?
Yeah, I've struggled with that a lot as far as the target audience, or the avatar, as some instructors of social media would call it, because I do want to reach those people. But at the same time, there's a lot of people within my own culture that also love education and inspiration. So I haven't just narrowed it down to just city folks, because it would look a lot different. But what I do want to do is put out content in such a way that even though we might be talking about ranching stuff or cattle or horses, by the end of the episode, they've heard a bunch of that stuff, but they've also heard the realities of your life and your perspectives. Because one of my kind of big mottos is that it's really hard to hate or dismiss somebody if you truly have listened to their story. So you don't have to agree with them, but if you know somebody's story, you can at least appreciate their perspective a little bit. And that's all I'm trying to do with this, is share a story through a bunch of individual stories that shows the human side and the human struggles, but also introduces people to some of the realities of rural life and agriculture.
Right. And I think that one of the things that I've noticed in listening to your first couple of episodes is, which have been kind of long form, in-depth conversations with your dad. So that's been really good to hear somebody as close to him as you are ask him questions, because that's going to definitely be a different flavor. But one of the things that I've noticed is that you're taking some time to define different things, taking the time to define what is a camp when we're talking about ranch camps, and especially as your dad encountered them, early on in his career, they were quite a bit different than most of them are today. But yeah, it's taken some time to define that. So that's part of this, right? Part of the strategy is to have these conversations, but not just assume everybody knows what X, Y, and Z is.
100%. Because, well, it's funny you bring that up, because when Dad and I sat down, I told him before we started, I said, this is going to be really hard for me, because you're not just somebody that I'm interviewing that I know or I'm acquainted with. Like, I know you. I am your son. I grew up in your household. So I told him, I was like, the challenge for me as the interviewer is going to be having a conversation in a way where there's not all this unspoken dialogue going on, where, we're kind of in our own little world. And so I really tried to concentrate on stopping, educating whoever might be listening that's not familiar with our culture, what the terms are that he's talking about or what the concept is. And I'm just getting started, so we'll see how that goes as I get more people interviewed. But yeah, I've watched that with my wife. My wife is a land use planner, and so she's in lots of county commission meetings, and some of the stuff is kind of contentious over subdivisions and issues like that. But I admire her so much because she's somebody she's very strong, and she knows the law. There's probably nobody coming in that room that knows the law better than she does. And that's her niche. And that's how she knows. That's why she's good at what she does. But one thing that she does that nobody's ever done around here is when things get heated, she recognizes that a lot of times it's because there's a lack of understanding. Okay, we can't do this because there is this Montana law. Before, people just hear, nope, you can't do that. If that comes up, she takes the time to educate them. And in a public forum, a lot of these are recorded. And I saw so much value in that, where it's something so simple to us, like a single word or a single phrase that people from outside of our culture won't understand. And it might be something important, but they'll just skip it because they don't understand what it means. So I kind of want to take some inspiration from my wife and do some of that in these conversations. Take a second to educate the public as to the particulars about what we're talking about.
And I really appreciate kind of that, the goal that you've shared of it's hard to hate somebody when you know their story or when you've heard their story.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe never been more important than in our culture right now. Because I think that there are a lot of people, a lot of companies, a lot of businesses that make their living on pitting one group of people against another. And we need to find ways to cut through that noise and give them opportunities to learn about the people they don't necessarily know.
Yeah. One of the things I hope to do with this podcast is I'm not just going to interview ranchers. I'm not just going to interview cowboys. I have a pretty magnificent list of people that I hope to interview if they'll entertain the idea. But I'm going to try and have a pretty diverse group of people because, like you just mentioned, there's a lot of disconnect. But it's not just disconnect from the city people not understanding us. It goes the other way too. We're pretty quick to dismiss them because we don't understand their point of view. If somebody votes Democrat, how easy is it to just be like, don't really care what you have to say now. But you don't know where they're coming from. You don't know why they believe what they believe. And like I said, I don't have to agree with you. But if I know where you're coming from, I can at least respect your point of view.
Right. Yep. And tell me about some of the ways that your life has shaped you to take on this project. Some of your experiences that you had growing up that have exposed you to other people in the way they think that helps you to be uniquely qualified for this project.
Yeah, that's a great question. It really started when I was really young. I was probably about 7 years old. And my mom, she used to write a lot of articles for the country magazine. And she got involved somehow. They had a tour company, Worldwide Country Tours. And they started hosting one of their tours. They called it the Big Sky Country Tour. Started in Utah, drove up through rural Idaho, through southwest Montana, looped around back through Yellowstone Park, and made their way back down to Utah. But our family got picked to host the Montana part. And then my mom would host the whole thing often. But I can remember being a little kid and just being kind of surprised at the questions that people were asking. I mean, these were people that, some of them were from the Midwest and were farmers, so they had kind of a general concept of agriculture. But there was people on that bus that seemed completely foreign to me. Like that, when they would describe their life and living in a city and, walking on sidewalks everywhere and driving taxis, subways, I couldn't even conceive any of that. But we hosted those tours, or our family did, for 20 years. So I grew up in it. And the older I got, the more I started to realize, wow, like mom and dad sitting up there on the microphone on this bus, they're like opening people's eyes to something that they've never seen before. And that's where it got started. As I've gotten older, I started guiding hunters sometime in my 20s. And that was another kind of eye-opener, because there's a lot of people that come out to hunt. They pay thousands of dollars to come experience stuff that we take for granted. And the conversations I had with those guys and gals really kind of opened my eyes to, hey, there's a lot of ignorance isn't the right word. There's a big lack of understanding and even awareness of what life is really like out here. And to go back to what got me started doing media at all, I was sitting on a ridge at probably about 8,500 feet, maybe 9,000, with a hunter that I'd been hunting with for a couple days. So we'd had a lot of chance to talk. We were just hunting one-on-one, and this blizzard rolled in. And I mean, you can't see the horse that's 10 feet in front of you tied to a tree blizzard. So we decided to sit and wait it out, see if the elk were going to come out in this meadow we were watching. And I built a fire, got him comfortable, and we were just sitting around real quiet. And he says, kind of all of a sudden, he said, Clayton, I'm going to say something, and it might kind of irritate you, but I just know that I don't mean it that way. But you have an amazing background. He said, your childhood is something that to me is like out of a book. And you have a great outlook on life. And, we've talked about it, but I'm getting the idea that you don't really share that in a bigger way. And shame on you for that. And he didn't mean that in any sort of, mean way, but it really got my attention and made me think, I'm an outgoing person. I like to communicate. I should be doing something. And that's when I got the little video camera and started packing it around. But
right,
that's the inspiration.
And shame on you, and from the respect of like you're cheating other people of hearing how unique your life was, is the way I take it.
Yeah. He just thought that I have a story that's worth telling, not my own story necessarily, but like the story of my culture, and it's worth telling, and I'm not sharing it with anybody. Like people need to hear that kind of stuff. And, I'll never forget that.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Ranch Right.
Does a year's worth of tax prep stand between you and being able to send things to your accountant? Are you tired of email after email asking for documents that you don't know how to find? Are you wondering exactly how much money you're going to owe the IRS this year and have no clue how to even start to figure that out? We've been there, but you don't have to. Hire Ranch Right today and know where your business stands. After all, taxes are a part of life, but Ranch Right helps you with data entry, bookkeeping, gives you reports that you can make sense of, and helps with a realistic outlook of what your business needs this tax season. Visit www.ranchright.llc today and cross tax prep off your list.
So, we've kind of talked about what it is and why it matters and why you're uniquely qualified for it. But I guess, where I'd like to go from there is that I think that part of what you're talking about is managing conflict and conflict resolution, and you talk about your wife being able to point out where people are kind of talking past each other and not really saying the same thing, or somebody misunderstood one idea.
Yeah.
So can you talk to me about some of the lessons that you learned growing up that helped to communicate these things in a way that was more accessible?
growing up on that big ranch, it was very traditional for most of my life, or most of my childhood. Dad took over in 1990, running the place, and he'd been cow boss for a long time before that. But in the 90s, he started switching over to families, rather than the traditional old system of drifting cowboys and bunkhouses and seasonal work. So we got to watch probably hundreds of different people come through the ranch, work there, move on to the next adventure. And when you have that many people all working together, and ranching, it's not just like 8 to 5, go home, do your own thing. You live around each other on the ranch. You're working together all the time. It breeds, or it creates an environment for an extra level of social conflict. So I got to watch, excuse me. So I got to watch a lot of that conflict happen. And over the years, I got to watch how Dad and the other management staff at the ranch would handle those situations. In some ways it worked really good. In some ways it didn't. That would probably be my initial experience into watching social conflict. And conflict isn't always bad, but how you handle it is what matters. So I got to see a lot of handling of conflict that didn't work well, but I also got to see some that worked really well. And that was kind of the inspiration for it. And it's interesting to me that you say that your perception of this is that trying to resolve conflict, because I've never thought of it that way. But that's really what it is. I'm trying to help resolve conflict in some cases before it even starts. Like if somebody who watches Yellowstone all of a sudden starts Googling cowboy stuff and living in Montana, I really want something that I can put out there to be available to them so that they can get a real taste of what reality is. It's interesting to me, some of the local conflict that we have in our own county. Our county is one of the fastest growing counties in Montana. And not only that, we have a very unique demographic because we have Big Sky in our county. So you have, and Big Sky, for those of you who don't know, it's like where the Justin Biebers and the guy that owns GoPro and not Justin Bieber, Justin Timberlake, but lots of those movie stars and the richest people in the world have a playground in Big Sky, Montana. And then you have people on the opposite end of the spectrum that are below the poverty level. And you have people that have been here since their families have been here since it was settled in the late 1800s. And then all these new people coming in. The influx of people from California and other states that really took off after COVID is remarkable. And they move here with a perception of what they think it's going to be like. And then sometimes the reality is kind of harsh. So I'd like to have conversations recorded in this podcast as we move forward that can kind of help people get some reality there when they're looking to move to the West.
Do we in agriculture sometimes I feel like get up on our high horse about how uneducated the American public is. And I always have kind of a twinge reaction to that, and kind of I suspect it's maybe not as bad as some people paint it out to be, but do you have experiences where people thought, oh, chocolate milk comes from brown cows? I mean, do you have,
For sure.
That's just, is it really that bad, or is it not quite as bad as all that?
In some cases it is that bad. And there for a while earlier in my life, I had a chapter where I had a town job and I was a drill instructor for the Montana Youth Challenge Academy. And I had that for a few years. And that was a very special part of my life, but it was super hard. All those kids are at risk. So they're not all bad kids, but they're all at risk and they all have some trouble. And they're all Montana kids. But even then I can remember having conversations with some of them kids that are from Montana that were just so out of left field, and they didn't really know where food comes from, like, because they've never got it from anywhere other than a grocery store. Or you start talking about wildlife. We'd be out marching, and they'd see like a llama or something out in a pasture, and is that an elk? And so we like to think that, that doesn't go on in our own urban areas of Montana, but it does. And then once you get out into the larger metropolitan areas, I think there's a lot of that. And well, I've witnessed quite a bit of it. And I'll bring up something I mentioned in my first episode. And you hear that phrase, perception is reality, or a person's perception becomes a reality. Well, a person's perception is based on knowledge that they have. And it doesn't matter if that knowledge is right or wrong in this context. Their perception of reality is based on the knowledge that they have. The knowledge that they have is based on information that they have consumed. So their reality is based on something that they consumed. And where are people getting most of their information now? Mm-hmm. Where are these people learning about food and real life concepts in rural culture? They're getting it from TV. They're getting it from social media, and they're getting it from news. Everything has a bias. Everybody has a bias. In some cases, those biases are really, really strong. But I don't have an influence in anything except for the social media part. And if I can put some of what I consider to be more accurate information out there, maybe we can start to shift a little bit of that perception.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that your podcast will be something for everybody. Honestly, I think that that the people who love the West, know the West, live in the West, can tune in and get something out of it, as well as the people who are curious about the West and never been to the West, and the only thing they have seen of the West is Yellowstone, the TV show. And so I think that there are going to be benefits for both, and we're early on, but is that a safe assumption?
It is a safe assumption. I said also in that first episode, I said that those of us in the Western life are good at telling stories. We're really good at telling stories. But the bad part is we're best at telling stories to our own people, to our own culture. And that's normal. That's human nature. We tend to communicate the best with people who understand us. And so it's really easy to isolate ourselves to our own little sphere of understanding and, keep everybody else on the outside. Where I'm going with this is that your podcast, for example, is amazing, but it's really geared towards other people within our culture, right? You can have a detailed conversation with Alderspring about their inherding and different concepts with cattle management and resource management. But people from the city aren't going to understand any of that. So they're not, it's not a good way to reach them. My theory is that if I can come from a human standpoint and really try to accentuate the human existence, through our own perspectives and our own stories, that it will be more easily consumable by people outside of our culture, as well as the people inside of our culture. I don't want to discredit podcasts like your own, and those of us that are out there with podcasts telling stories to each other and educating each other, because that's very important. We learn and we can be inspired by our peers. So I'm not discrediting that at all. I think what you guys do is amazing. I'm trying to come from a little bit different angle because, there's a lot of you guys out there that are doing great work.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate what you're trying to do, and I think it's important. And I think that the healing the brokenness between the rural and the urban is incredibly important. And I think that podcasts are a great way to do it. I mean, you literally have access to billions of people through that medium, and there's no gatekeepers. I mean, really, the only gatekeepers in podcasting are your ability to get the message out and cut through the noise. I mean, the gatekeeper becomes the fact that there are that many other there are that many other places, channels fighting for their attention, but other than that, everybody really has the same access. The feed goes to the same platform as everybody else's. And so if you can find a way to cut through the noise, then you have a basically unlimited audience. And so I think it's awesome that you're doing what you're doing. And I hope it is successful in accomplishing your goal, and not even necessarily, large numbers, although that would be awesome too, but finding people who can come to understand better the West and those things. So what would you say are some communication techniques that help to educate people to get those stories and those points across, to cut through the fact that they've gotten their information from a different source? What are some of the communication techniques and things that you have found to be the most common misconceptions of people that are not necessarily haven't grown up in this lifestyle?
There's a lot in that question. I'm going to go into the techniques a little bit. Years ago, one of my other town jobs was selling cars. And selling cars in your hometown, I thought it was going to be easy because I knew everybody, but it was tough because everybody knew me. And so they all wanted a special deal, or they're related to me, so they wanted a special deal. Or my ex-father-in-law owned the dealership. So, everybody wanted a special deal. Well, when you're working on commission, you can't make a living on special deals. But I had to learn real quick how to talk to people about something I wasn't familiar with that much. I mean, yeah, I like trucks as much as the next person, but I'm a ranch kid. And I was at the dealership with my cowboy hat on. I was there because I needed to be for my livelihood. So I had to learn not only about the cars, but I had to learn about people. And one of the things that I learned was that it all starts with building common ground, finding common ground. It doesn't matter who walks in that door. There's some way that you have common ground. And if you can have a real human conversation about something not even related to the cars, that will open the door to have a conversation that will lead to them potentially buying a car from you. That's where a lot of this is coming from. I want to take those quips that we hear from somebody that says, "Oh, did you see this on Yellowstone?" And there's a lot of us in our culture that we know that Yellowstone's kind of a joke in a lot of ways, but it does get people talking. And why not, instead of just dismissing, "Oh, Yellowstone, I'm tired of hearing about that," why not be like, "Oh, what did you think about that? Do you want to know what it's really like?" And start conversations like that. I say Yellowstone. It's not like there's not other things inspiring people to look into the West, but we got to be honest. There's not been anything in modern history that has put so much attention on cowboys and ranching in the Western culture than that TV show. And it is still such a active part of what people are thinking about. A few months ago, there was a county employee that moved here from California, city guy. He didn't know anything about living in the rural area. And my wife asked him, "Why'd you even apply for this job? Why would you come here of all places?" And he told her, he's like, "Oh, I was watching this show called Yellowstone, and I just really wanted to move out here." And this is somebody that became a county employee, and he's no longer here. But
that first winter did him
really,
in.
that was really striking to me that, somebody would move from San Francisco of all places to Madison County, Montana, where there's not even a stoplight, no fast food, just based on inspiration from a TV show. That's how powerful that is. And it's easy for us to dismiss it or, roll our eyes at it, but people see a glimpse of a better life. They see a glimpse of something of freedom. And they want it. And I don't blame them. If I could see a way to get out of a city and move to a slower pace of life that was more peaceful and I had more freedom, I would be trying to do the same thing. So I think, to get back to your question, I want to take advantage of anything I can that they bring up and find common ground in it and figure out a way to take that conversation somewhere. For example, there's a new intern that just started in our local conservation district office. She comes from a metropolitan area, I think in Michigan. She heard me talking about my podcast in the office one day and went and looked at it, and then emailed me shortly thereafter and was just like, I am the person you're talking about. I am from the city. I have so many questions. You just opened my eyes to so much stuff that I've been curious about since I moved out here. And, she was very appreciative about it. And that really just kind of confirmed to me, you just need to have a conversation with people at their level.
Yep. Well, and that'll stoke your fire for a long time, right? Getting an email like that.
Oh, man. Yeah. And somebody young too.
Right.
Like, that's one of the things that we see a lot, or I see a lot, in as far as agricultural communications. There's some demographic trends there where a lot of the audience is my age or older. I want to try and reach these younger people in these cities that don't know where their food comes from, that don't genuinely have a concept of what it takes to get hamburger into the grocery store.
Right.
And I see this as an opportunity. I don't know exactly how I'm going to do it, but I see an opportunity, and the only way to move forward is to take a first step.
Yep, for sure. Well, and you talk about the power of storytelling, especially storytelling in the West, and what's the power of Yellowstone? What made Yellowstone what it is? Telling a good story, right?
Yep. Excellent storytelling. And I will tell you, there's a lot of people from our culture that would love Yellowstone if it didn't have all the sexual stuff and an F word every sentence.
Right.
But Taylor Sheridan has done an amazing job of speaking to the people in the way that they want to hear. Right. He's right. Whether we agree with that or not, he's reaching people that we would never be able to reach because he's willing to go there.
Yep. Yeah. I caught myself. I should have said stories told excellently.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily good stories in the good, true, and beautiful sense of the word, but they are stories told excellently.
Yes.
And so how do you then achieve success, right? It's telling good stories and telling good stories excellently, and if you do that, I think that is a podcast that's more likely to get traction and accomplish the goal of bridging that rural and urban divide, and I think that's
one of the things that I'm excited about with the podcast. I've had a YouTube channel that's had some success, but it's just been me in front of a camera talking about something that I'm passionate about. And I want to tell a story that's not just about me. I don't want to tell my story. I want to tell a bigger story through other people. And when you talk about telling an excellent story, think about all the people that walk through our lives. Have you ever been around somebody for a long time and then you don't hear much from them, and then one day for some reason they launch off and tell a story and you're just like, whoa, that explains so much. There are so many people in our lives that have an amazing story they just don't have a platform to share it, and they don't have anybody asking for it. So that's what I'm trying to do, because you have had an excellent story. Everybody that you interview has an excellent story, and it's kind of up to us as podcasters or media to be able to try to help them tell that story. And that's something I'm really trying to learn and observe, how to be a good interviewer, because your interview skills will help that person tell their story in a cohesive way that can then be absorbed by an audience that maybe isn't in this person's realm.
Yeah, for sure. So in your mind, where do you see this rural and urban divide going? Where does it, I know none of us has a crystal ball. You and I are neither of us are prophets nor the son of a prophet, but where do you see it going? In my mind, it doesn't go anywhere good. It's not heading in a positive direction. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would agree with that. And when in any facet of history, in any culture, has anything positive come out of people isolating themselves to their own sphere and completely removing themselves from other cultures? It never ends up good, because, and I'm not a globalist necessarily, but at the same time, we all are human beings. We all exist under the same atmosphere. There is a level where we have to be able to communicate, because if we just retreat to our own corners, then we end up just feuding all the time, because we don't appreciate where the other person's coming from. And I see this in politics. If you're talking about where it's going, we're watching it right now. Look at the divide in politics. And I'm not saying one party is right or the other. They're both part of the same bird. Both wings are part of the same bird. I might have a way that I lean that is closer to my beliefs and closer to my logic. But I have to remember that I'm not on the other end. I am not somebody living in a slum in a city. I'm not homeless. It's easy to be like, I know the answer, do it this way. But we don't know the whole story. And if you ask where this goes, it is all negative. If this divide keeps getting worse, and I really don't even want to go there, because we know what happens when a certain party takes their own side and won't talk to the other party. That divide just gets bigger and bigger, and next thing you know, you have civil wars, you have all sorts of chaos. And I'm not saying that my podcast is going to bridge some major gaps, but it's a step. It's me putting something out there to make an attempt to bridge a gap to whatever extent I can.
Right. Yep. No, it's better to have tried and failed than to have done nothing at all. Right. And I'm not saying you're going to fail. I think you've got a lot of the boxes checked to succeed for sure. And I would love to see it accomplish the goals that you have set out. And I think that I agree with you. One of my favorite political quotes of all time is that in our country we have two parties, the stupid party and the evil party, and sometimes they get together and do something both stupid and evil, and they call it bipartisanship. So
Right. Well, one of the things I'm so excited about with podcasting, and I should give some background here. Up until a couple of years ago, I'd heard the word podcast, but I'd never really listened to one. I'd been a guest on a couple like outdoor ones, but the only reason I listened to them is because they sent me a link to it. I'd never been to a podcast player before I went and listened to Dad's podcasts that like people like you interviewed him. So I'm kind of new to it, but I'm excited about it because these conversations that we're talking about, whether it's the conversation you and I are having or a conversation that, somebody is going to listen to maybe 10 years from now. We're recording this. And that's the wonderful thing about these conversations is that other people are going to be able to listen. My kids may not listen to it now, but maybe 10 years from now, they will. Maybe after I'm dead, they will. And maybe it will change their life.
Right. Yep.
So the podcast that I just did with my dad, there's a lot of people that I could have gotten to be my first guest. The way I handled those interviews is going to be a little bit different than some of my future ones, but I really went into it with that attitude of this is a father-son, this is a Marxer family legacy recorded right here, and I want this to be something that my kids, grandkids, great-grandkids can absorb and appreciate someday.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So who do you have any others recorded and set to release, ready to go?
No, I was going to do some this week, but I've been so sick that yesterday I talked for about 10 minutes and lost my voice. So today I'm actually doing pretty good. But
yeah,
no, and the other thing about all of this is I greatly underestimated the effort and time it was going to take to edit podcasts, especially video podcasts, because I'm doing audio and video. And the video, I got a couple camcorders to make a multi-angle. Well, I don't have the switcher and I don't have somebody to run it. So I'm just recording it all on different cameras and a separate sound recorder, putting that all into the computer and then just piece by piece. That first podcast probably took me 15 hours to edit and put together. And a lot of that was because I'd made mistakes because I'd never done that many tracks before.
Sure. No, well, it turned out really well. I mean,
Thank
from
you.
audio and video perspective, it was excellently done. And also the interview was very good. You know, I would never have guessed that you hadn't listened to lots of podcasts, because that's where a lot of people, it's where I learned how to do interviews, is by listening to other people do it. And so, yeah, you did a great job. It was very well done.
There's some learning the hard way going on here. And I didn't talk about this yet. I didn't talk about this in any of my previous episodes, but many years ago when I was in high school, the local radio station had a rodeo roundup, they called it. It was a half-hour live broadcast every weekday. And every Wednesday, they wanted to do something on that episode or on that broadcast with youth and 4-H and that kind of stuff. And they asked me to host it. So, man, I said, all the time. Like I don't ever want to hear those episodes ever again because I was so bad. But I liked interviewing people. So I'd script out interview questions and I'd find people to interview. So I've kind of done this before and was really bad at it, but learned some lessons, and I'm incorporating those into my current endeavor.
Nice. Yeah, very good. Who are some of the people on your list? I mean, I had a list when I started, and some of them I've gotten around to, or some of them I've been able to actually interview. Some of them I still haven't. But who would be some people who are on your list, or people that have agreed that people might be able to hear in the near future?
All right. I had to pull my phone out because the list is really big. I'm on your podcast. I'm a little nervous being in front of such a podcast star, so I might forget something. Trinity Vandenaker has been doing big things with YouTube. He's got a couple 100,000 subscribers now, and he is a very genuine person trying to do a very good job doing similar to what I am, trying to educate people that are interested in Western culture. He's diving into details more than I will with what I'm trying to do, but it's kind of in the same vein. And I want to interview him. There's a guy that I went to college with. His name's Jens Berg, and he is a silversmith, but he grew up ranching, long family history there in Johnson County, Wyoming. And we have history because we were roommates in college, but I want to interview him because his business, Jens Berg, he's a silversmith, is blowing up. And the things that he's making is amazing. So I want to talk to that element of like arts and crafts. Another person in that arts and crafts type deal is Ben Christensen. Ben Christensen is one of the most famous Western photographers that a lot of people don't even know who he is, but they've seen his photos everywhere. He does a lot of photos for Harley Davidson, Henry Firearms, a lot of huge brands. But then he also has a very creative side, and he just produced his own Western movie. Well done. It's got John Wayne's son, Ethan Wayne, in it, and he's doing it all on his own. And he has a little brand called Living My Own Western. And what I love about Ben is that he's so passionate about Western culture, and he's not from there. He's an urban guy, but he has so much passion and respect for the cowboy image and the cowboy culture that he's basically dedicated his life to showcasing that in beautiful ways. So I really want to interview him. Another one, we've got a local guy here that I rodeoed with in high school, but he's a realtor, and he's selling ranches and lots of real estate to a lot of these people who are wanting to move in. I really want to talk to him, get his story, but then also his perspective on what is happening with the tremendous growth we have. And I'll just go through some names here. Dwayne from Dry Creek Wrangler School. I've been following Dwayne for years because we both have a shared passion of old cowboy guns and guiding. That's how I started following him. He had less subscribers than I did not that long ago. And then he just crossed crazy. 1 million subscribers. Judy Wagner, that is the marketing gal for Montana Silversmiths. I've known Judy most of my entire life, but she's such a champion for Western culture and rodeo and women. An amazing human being, and I really want to interview her. Taylor Nargang, he runs the marketing for Ariat. Went to school here in Montana from a rodeo ag family. There's a Bar 7 Ranch. I'm sure you're probably aware of them, the Texas family that they have their own little first generation farm and ranch. They have a huge following. They have millions of followers, and they just document their life. People like that. There's a book out called The Lost Cowboy by J.B. Zielke. And he is one of the only people that I know of or have ever read about that made an effort to cowboy on every continent except Antarctica. And he's been on all of them. I think 6 continents. He's done some sort of herdmanship on, and he wrote a book about those adventures called The Lost Cowboy. I'm in the middle of it, and he's agreed to be on the podcast. He'll be probably next month.
Nice.
There's so many. I've probably got 70 on here. Here's one more. This guy, he was an executive for Nike in Portland, Oregon for 14 years. And I sold him my old Suburban, and we got to talking, and I was so shocked at his story. Him and his girlfriend just one day decided they'd had enough, and they moved out to Driggs, Idaho, and just started a couple small businesses and are just living the country life. And it's so amazing to me to see somebody who's been at that level of worldwide success found a switch, found a point in their life where they recognized what they really valued, and they came out here. So I want to get him on to get that perspective, because he can talk to that urban population that I can't, because I don't understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I'll love to watch the journey because it's really that'd be awesome. Even just a few of those would be amazing. And the best part about podcasting is how willing people are to come on and tell their story. And so I think that in my experience, you'll have good success getting those guys on, and that'll be awesome to see it grow. So I wish you the best. I hope it works out. Anything else we missed, or anything else you want to say, or where can people go to catch up with you?
Well, for this podcast, people can search Living Western. It's new, so that it's not across Google very well, but the more you search it, the more it's going to get there. But the handle that you can search is at Living Western _podcast. And that will bring up Instagram and the YouTube channel, because it is a video podcast and audio. It's Living Western. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, all the big podcast platforms. And then the website is livingwesternpodcast.com. And we're still building that, but it is available. And I'm hoping that there's some other opportunities for people rather than just the podcast. I'm not going to divulge yet what my dreams are, but I would like to see Living Western be more of a brand than just a podcast. And gosh, I'm really excited for where it can go. I will tell you, it is tough starting over. Like, I've got 20-some thousand subscribers on my other YouTube channel. So starting over from scratch, it's rough. And then I'm at that stage where every podcast download that comes in they all mean a lot, but just to get 5 is a huge deal for me. So I don't know how long it took for you to get to the point where you could breathe and you were like, okay, it is growing. But
yep. Yeah. Just to put it in perspective, man, if there were X number of people in a room, would you show up to tell your story? I mean,
yeah.
And so I'm sure you've heard that being around the creator space for a long time, but just thinking about that, and it doesn't have to get very, very big before you think, heck yeah, I'd show up to tell my story. And so it's always worth doing. So yeah, well, good on you for getting started. I appreciate it. Links for all that will be in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/353. But for now, Clayton, thanks for your time today.
Well, thank you. And I hope that I can interview you at some point because you're on this list.
I'd be honored. Very good stuff there with Clayton. Really excited to see where the podcast goes. He does have a couple of the installments of the episode with JB Zilke up at this point. So if you're interested in hearing the story of a guy who's ranched on 6 continents, they're up and available, and they'll be in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/353. You can go there, watch them, download them, listen to them, however you like to get them. You can do that. So got a couple of different directions we might go next week. One of them is an episode I did before the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition with Cooper Hibbard on composite animals and the importance of composites to what they're doing there at Sieben Land and Livestock. Might go that direction. Might also have a little bit of a preview of a drought webinar that I will be emceeing, hosting with the South Dakota Grassland Coalition. So one or the other will probably be where we go next week. But to find out which one it is, come back next week, and we will see you again real soon on another episode of the Working Cows Podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.